Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Ava Ramirez, NA, and I am joined by my colleague, Kimberly Henry. Both Kim and I work on this Office on Violence Against Women grant titled Advocating for Military Connected Survivors. And this training is just one of the many offerings provided through this grant in order to best support you all as community and system-based advocates, allied professionals, and civilian direct service providers with the intentions to help expand your knowledge and services for supporting military connected survivors. We will dive into what all of that means as we move forward, but we are grateful you are here taking this training, watching this webinar, and please feel free to reach out to our team with any questions, concerns, comments following your completion. We will provide our contact information at the end. So again, thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to enhance your understanding on this topic. This training is 60 minutes long with the focus on military connected survivors of domestic and dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, or DVSAS as it will be referred to throughout. So, as I said earlier, my name is Dr. Ava Ramirez, NA. I am the military CCR Senior Program Manager at NOVA. And a little bit about me, I am a Marine Corps veteran. And during my service, I served as a Uniform Victim Advocate, or UVA, for military sexual assault survivors. And it was really this experience that ignited my passion for advocacy and military victim survivors.
Hi, my name is Kim Henry, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am the Military Coordinated Community Response Program Manager. I am a licensed master social worker, and I was led to that after serving 10 years in the Navy, where I was also a uniform or a just victim advocate, as we call it in the Navy, which led me to be a federal victim advocate and led me to be here at NOVA. So I'm happy to be here. And again, thank you for being here to learn more about military connected survivors, unique challenges that we face, and how best to support us.
Thank you, Kim. And Kim and I both do have diverse backgrounds and experiences in education. And we are so excited to be able to share with you during this session, but also doing so with the understanding that we are human and also continually learning as well. So if there's any feedback, please feel free to provide. So now moving into our learning objectives for this presentation, we intend to educate on military culture and lifestyle in order to provide a foundational understanding of military culture, including its hierarchical structure, norms, and values, and how these aspects influence the behaviors and experiences of military connected individuals. We also intend to identify challenges faced by military connected survivors to really highlight the unique challenges and barriers that military connected survivors face, such as stigma, fear of reporting abuse, and potential impacts on them and their family member or the service member's career. Also, we will be exploring legal protections and resources very briefly in order to outline the differences between military protective orders and civilian protective orders, and also provide information. Fourth, we would like to promote effective military and civilian collaboration by discussing strategies for building strong partnerships between military and civilian agencies to really, again, enhance that support for survivors, which includes coordinated community response and best practices for effective advocacy. And lastly, we want to enhance service provision to survivors. This will increase awareness among civilian agencies and community advocates about how to effectively serve this unique population and ensure they have access to comprehensive supportive services. So moving into our first learning objective, which is to educate on military culture and lifestyle. And to start off, I would like you to take a moment to think of the word military. And when you hear that word, what comes to mind for you? And this exercise is something that we do every time we present to different audiences. And although the audiences may change, a lot of the responses are very similar, if not the exact same. And examples of those can be seen on the screen. And they include strength, uniform, war, guns, PTSD, toxic masculinity, weapons, and several others. And these are helpful to reflect on because not only do these terms drive perceptions, but they can also influence behaviors, relationships, and relationship building. And they also highlight some of the very common barriers and unique dynamics that military victim survivors may have to navigate, and why many of them will seek off base community resources, which is also why it's important for you all as community support services and professionals to be ready to serve these unique survivors. I will also say that if you are a provider or an advocate that has zero knowledge or experience with the military, I understand that learning about and relationship building with this population can seem daunting and confusing. And please know that you're not alone in those feelings, but also don't let that be a barrier from keeping you away. I do commend you for taking this first step to learn more by watching this training. And please know that our team here at NOVA can provide additional support as well. So when discussing this population, I would also like to address the common negative perceptions or stigmas about the military. And I do this sensitively, understanding that both sides, as a very proud veteran who actively supports military and victim survivors, and I can also acknowledge the damage that has been done by the military and that there's always room for improvement. And that includes each one of us and all the institutions. And if you hold some of those perceptions that maybe can be keeping you from connecting with military bases or advocates in your area, I would just like you to ask yourself one question, and that is, why did you choose to enter this field of victim advocacy or community support for victim survivors? And while you're thinking about that, your why for being here and why you continue to show up each day, I will caveat and ask you to consider how, as advocates, we are there to support that individual in front of us, regardless of the circumstances surrounding the assault, regardless of their religious preference or race and ethnicity, and also regardless of our own personal beliefs, experiences, and biases. Each of us are multidimensional, diverse, and complex human beings with backgrounds and identities that are intersectional. And as trauma informed and ethical advocates, it really is our duty to support that entire person, which does include military status or connectivity. So please keep this in mind as we move forward.
Thank you, Ava. And going off of what she said and continuing that conversation and really being able to support a military connected survivor is understanding the service branches that they are a part of and understanding that identity. We know that there are the different U.S. Armed Forces listed here. The Armed Forces branches are the Air Force, the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, and as of December 2019, the Space Force. The Department of Homeland Security has the U.S. Coast Guard. But what I really want you to take away from this slide is, yes, the 6 different service branches, but also in parentheses, we intentionally put the title or what the language or the term that is used to identify the service members in that branch. So, for example, Airmen and Air Force or Marines and Marine Corps. Too commonly, we are sometimes called soldiers, and it's very important to recognize that each service branch has their own title for their service members. And there is a lot of similarities among service branches, but there's a lot of differences. And a lot of military service members, myself being Navy and Ava being Marine Corps, excuse me, a lot of service members are very proud of their service branch. They're proud of the similarities, but they're also proud of those differences as well and what makes their service branch different. And it's extremely important just to recognize that these titles are what we like to and prefer to be referenced as. So, in working with a military connected survivor, uh, try to engage with them considering that because it could also be an indication of the culture that they were in during the assault or during their experience. So, why do people join the military? Everybody joins the military for a host of different reasons, and here are a few different reasons. One could be the family tradition. I have met people who have generations upon generations, and their brothers and sisters, and aunts and uncles, grandparents. Everybody is in the military. Started out as a military brat, now their children are in the military, and then after they were in the military. It's a family tradition. There's also the Universal Military Training and Service Act of 1951. So relevant to that as well as a selective service system in 1948, the draft. But also some of the more common reasons that we hear is the education and training, the benefits that people can get by joining, not just the GI Bill, but the free education and tuition assistance while you're a service member, and also all the certifications and training that the military can provide. I was intel myself and working in intelligence. There are certain clearances that are very lucrative to have, and that was a training that was part of the reason why I joined. There's also that sense of responsibility to serve. We really saw this as a country after 9/11, and having that responsibility to serve because of a situation that happened like the terrorist attacks of 9/11, or maybe seeing something in their community, or wanting to give back, or wanting to be a part of something bigger than themselves. There's also the health benefits. Many people know that the Department of Defense has a lot of different health benefits that are offered to the service members and their families. And of course, as veterans, veterans have support as well once they leave military service. And health benefits are extremely helpful as for families, especially for families that may have a high need family member who needs health benefits. There's also adventure and escape. And when we talk about adventure and escape, it could be someone like myself who grew up in a very tiny town in Kansas where we have bonfires on Friday nights after the football games. And I wanted to go see the world. A lot of people thought it was interesting that I joined the Navy being in Kansas, literally the center of the United States, there's no oceans around there. But I did want to have a little bit of an adventure and see the world. There are people who join because they want to escape maybe a bad situation. They want to escape something in their home life. Maybe they want to escape just something maybe they're too normal. They consider themselves not comfortable or too comfortable. Maybe they just want to escape something that's not necessarily toxic or harmful. It's just they want to get out and do something different. There are many, many, many different reasons why a lot of people join. But something that I want you to consider when working with military connected survivors is the fact that those military service members that join, over 50% of military service members have experienced adverse childhood experiences. And this is really key when working with military connected survivors. You are most likely going to, at some point, being an advocacy, going to work with, and while you're here, going to work with military connected survivors. You also need to keep in mind their previous experiences and why did they join, and recognizing that they could have already been joining with some traumatic experiences or, again, adverse childhood experiences. But again, many different service members join for different reasons and have different motivations for joining, and that may change. They may be joined 4 years for the service, the training and having college paid for, and they end up doing 20 years. But it does help them with their identity of why they became a service member.
Thank you so much, Kim. Such great points. And moving into military culture and pulling in some of those themes that Kim spoke to and also that were in the word cloud, there are a variety of elements that comprise military culture, and they're not all listed here. But what is important to consider and remember is that in the military, it's very common to have young adults enlisting right out of high school, which means they're leaving their hometown and everything they know and are instantly expected to behave like an adult with the roles they take on, whether that's with the relationships they take on, and also whether that's personal or professional, and that behavior that is expected of them when if they are stationed or deployed in a different country, a different state, or even in a war environment. And thinking back to our own life experience at 17, 18, for some people, the maturity, healthy coping behaviors, life skills may not yet be developed. And this is also something we see very similarly for first time college students, being away from home, access to new opportunities, and also added stresses and challenges. And we know the brain is not even fully developed until the mid or late 20s, yet consider everything the military population is expected to handle. So, also being immersed in this culture, it means that it is highly likely that your perspective, worldview, identity, and language are influenced. And that can happen through indoctrination, trainings, how the military is structured, and how each branch is guided by a set of values such as honor, courage, commitment. And this can really inspire service members to dedicate everything to their service, the mission, dedicate everything to the unit, and always put everyone else first. It does become more than a job. It really is a close knit community and it becomes your way of life. And this is why, no matter how many years or when someone served, that experience remains impactful. And they can be contradictory experiences and feelings, positive, negative, or both, due to trauma, moral injury, being a sole survivor, or even our older veterans that may have been drafted. And one example of that is to consider how Vietnam veterans were treated following their return home due to the polarity of opinions on US involvement. So, considering all of this, and we'll even get into more trauma later on, Kim and I are very passionate about when you are in your professional role, we do recommend that prior to immediately thanking a service member, to first consider all the complexities and potential trauma that came along with that service experience. So, an easy ask is, are you comfortable being thanked for your service? I do understand there's genuine intention behind this gratitude. However, simple questions like this can really help to build rapport and empower victim survivor choice and autonomy. So, not surprising, the military is male dominated. Active duty, there's about 83% male, and this can also vary significantly. The Marine Corps active duty women make up only about 5%, so pretty significant disparity. And also important to remember is that although there is a variety of people from all different backgrounds that make up the military, there is a majority demographic, and those military connected individuals who belong to different ethnic and cultural groups are going to have different experiences, such as people of color, women, LGBTQIA+, all of those are going to have different experiences. So we want to make sure that we are interacting with that person on that individual level and not grouping them in all together as one majority. And speaking from personal experience, I do have some of the most amazing memories with friends, and I also have some not so great experiences. And this comes from my experience as a person of color and a woman in this environment. I did experience microaggressions, harassment, racism, and sexism, and it really did influence how I had to operate and show up in this world. I had to tailor what I said, how I said it, and how I acted in order to be taken seriously or be cautious or even prove that I deserve to be there just like everyone else. So, several different situations where I had to walk a very thin line. And I say all of this so that you can consider and take into account how this environment and how this culture influences how victim survivors are treated and or believed, and why many of them will seek off-base civilian and community resources. So additionally, military culture, military life brings high stress situations such as deployments and separations, which can be challenging not only for the service member, but also the family. That reunification period after a deployment or separation can cause additional stress. And there's relearning of the roles in the family. There can be questions of where and how do I fit in? Am I even needed? In addition to adjusting back to normal life with any trauma they may have experienced. So overall, a lot of high stress, a lot of unique situations that military populations are expected to handle, and also before the brain is even fully developed. And on top of that, there is the culture of being tough and mission oriented and sacrifice, which means that personal struggles and vulnerabilities are often not discussed and they're perceived as weakness. And if we are not allowed to ask for help or present weakness, this can be a source of why substance abuse, high risk behavior, and other unhealthy coping behaviors develop. So I say all of this with transparency so that you can be more aware of the complexities. Again, we're not grouping all military in together or having assumptions, but interacting with each person at that human individual level. So how many military connected people are there? Well, listed here are DoD statistics from 2022. For active duty, the number is over 1.3 million, which is pretty significant. However, keep in mind these will greatly influence as we begin to include our other military connected individuals. We also have the breakdown of the DoD branches by size, with the Army being the largest. Again, this data is also showing the predominance of male service members on active duty. Data for active duty family members. So these can point to why many families may need additional support because they have multiple children at young ages. Maybe they're relying on that one primary paycheck from the service member. Also, this data shows that a majority of spouses are female, average ages of 32 years old. And the chart in the the top right corner, it includes children and adult dependents. So important to understand additional stresses and challenges can be military families supporting parents or grandparents as well. All of this data is available on Military One Source. Those links are included here, and I do encourage you to check those out. And the next two slides have breakdowns of active duty and veterans around the US and world. On this slide depicts the breakdown of active duty, with the highest populations being in California, Virginia, Texas, and North Carolina. And that is likely due to the number of military installations in those states. However, keep in mind, if you don't live in one of those four states, it does not mean there's not a large military connected population in your area. And listed here is the breakdown of veterans across the US. So really good demographic for showing where they are located. Again, not including all the other members that are military connected, such as National Guard, reservists, veterans, and their families. And I know this data says 2019. It is the most recent data currently provided by the Veterans Affairs. So now that we've covered military culture and demographics, I understand it's already a lot of information. You always have the option to pause the recording, come back later, or rewatch. We're going to be moving into the challenges for military connected victim survivors. So first, let's clarify who is a military connected survivor, and also who should have access to military resources. However, keep in mind that some victim survivors, again, will choose not to use military resources and will be coming to you all in the community. So we have active duty, National Guard and Reserve, veterans, and civilian dependents. Additionally, intimate partner victim survivors are included as someone who has been or is currently in a relationship of a romantic nature, such as a current or former spouse, dating partner, someone who shares a child or has shared a home at the time of abuse. Also keep in mind, National Guard and Reserve members and families can receive some supportive services, such as mental health counseling, if the abuse occurs while in active status. However, they are unable to file a report and receive law enforcement assistance if the abuse occurred if the abuse occurred while they were not in active status. So National Guard and sexual assault victim advocates are not always with each National Guard branch either. The National Guard has sexual assault victim advocates, but not DV. So they would receive those services off installation with the community. also with veterans. So they are permitted to receive very limited resources and services on the installation, but they will rely heavily on the community once again, or also the Veterans Affairs. So there are some unique dynamics and criteria that can influence services. And again, I understand it might be a little bit confusing, but this is why it's important for you to establish those relationships with your military advocates and military bases so they can help support you as well.
Thank you, Ava. So let's talk about some of the occurrences or the prevalence of military connected domestic violence, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, and neglect, and why we talk about military connected survivors. This chart here discusses and presents the rate of domestic violence in the military. But what I want you to really focus on is the criteria. These are incidents that met Department of Defense criteria for domestic abuse in the fiscal years 2015 to 2019. So you can recognize in the Army, there were over 15,000, in the Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force were around the 10,000 range. Now, because it's over 4 years, you may recognize, for example, the Air Force, you could say had about 12,000. If you divide that up over 4 years, hey, that might be 3,000 a year. It doesn't seem like that much when you look at the numbers Ava just presented to you of how many people are actually in the military. However, this again is only representation of domestic abuse that met criteria. The DoD has a criteria for what is domestic abuse, and then each service branch also has their own criteria. And you, as a community advocate operating in the state you operate, has your own criteria just as every other state does. So it's extremely important as we talk about partnerships later on to consider this because there might be a situation or an incident that does not meet DoD or a service branch's criteria for domestic abuse, but it actually does meet your state's or county criteria or laws for domestic abuse, and you can provide support to that military connected survivor. This chart here is representing the rates of unwanted sexual contact prevalence in the military. This is a piece of the graphic from a one-page report that comes out every year from the Department of Defense Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office. They have an annual report on sexual assault in the military, and they break it down by each service branch, and they even break it down to also in the U.S. service academies. But they have a one-pager that kind of summarizes the information, and this is a great graphic from that because it shows the unwanted sexual contact for each service branch. It's divided in women and men. And I know throughout this presentation that we have said women and men, but we want to recognize that Nova here at Nova, Ava and I are accepting of all orientations and identities. However, the military only recognizes men and women, and so their data only represents men and women. So we see that there's a higher prevalence among women. And if you look at that bottom statistic of female service members who indicated an experience of unwanted sexual contact and reported it, there was an estimated 26% experienced a behavior that actually met the legal criteria for retaliation. And so I'm on this next slide, I'm going to talk about unique dynamics and challenges, but keep in mind what we already talked about, right? That military culture and that structure and the hierarchy and it being male dominated. If you're a female and it being in a male dominated world and having fear of retaliation and the fear of impact that it could have on your career, think about how that as a community advocate, how you would support a survivor, a military connected survivor of sexual assault. There are many unique dynamics and challenges when it comes to being a military connected survivor. One example is alienation, which can really be compounded because in the military, of course, a lot of people are aware that you are moved often and immediately from your hometown when you get shipped off to boot camp. From there, you could not just be moved to a different state, but you could be moved overseas. Not just overseas, but you could be moved, you could be deployed. Not just deployed, but you could be moved to a place where there's no communications. I always got the question, which always kind of made me laugh, but people just thought we had Wi-Fi on the ships. And I said, there's not Wi-Fi in the middle of the Indian Ocean, you know. Um, there are satellite phones, but there's no Wi-Fi. And so, you know, and then you think about things like submarines, and then you think on land, there are special places where they do not want any communication. And so that's just deployment. But even families being separated and going overseas to different countries. There are so many instances in the military that families who are not in the military do not experience when it comes to alienation, and isolation. Additionally, a lot of military connected survivors deal with conflicted feelings of reporting their partner an abuser out of fear of jeopardizing their service member's career. Because if they do, then certain benefits, as it says here, financial or benefits, could actually be taken away. So if the service member is the offender, then they could possibly lose the housing allowance, which could be a couple thousands of dollars. They could lose the paycheck, or it even could be cut in half for a couple months at a time. And that could be a very fearful thing and cause a lot of tension, because that could be the only source of income for some of these families. Oh, sorry about that. There's also separations and deployments, which kind of, you know, I spoke to the isolation, but a lot of people think about the separation and you see those cute videos of people coming home. Deployments are hard. Ava and I have both deployed, you know, and whether it's a short deployment or a long deployment, it's tough, and you're separated. You're going through different emotions. You can't always be there when important things happen, good or bad, for yourself or for family members or people you care about. But also coming home from deployments, right? When you're coming home from a deployment, if you've been gone 10 months, the world still continued on without you. So, how do you go back into this world into your own home and fit in, right? How do you work into this environment that you're supposed to be comfortable in? And as a military connected survivor, if you've gone on deployment or if you've been separated while you were at a duty station or at training and something happens to you that makes you a military connected survivor, and you're going back to where you're supposed to feel at your safe place, but you don't, that can only heighten some of your trauma and possibly re-victimization, because you're not feeling safe or comfortable in the place where you most wanted to go back to so you could feel safe and comfortable. Then there's retaliation. Retaliation is real. It happens. It's also not discussed a lot, but it does happen, and it can lead to careers being destroyed. It can lead to service members being separated. It can lead to opportunities or promotions being taken away. And so the fear of retaliation keeps people from reporting. It keeps people from getting help. It keeps people from leaving their abuser. Um, it keeps military connected survivors, it's essentially in the situation that they're in. Um, Suicide and suicidality. It's extremely important to recognize. We hear a lot about veteran suicide, which is extremely important and close to Ava and I's heart, being suicide, being veterans and being having friends and people close to us that have died by suicide, but also military connected survivors, again, wherever they fall as a spouse, a service member, or intimate partner. It's extremely important to recognize that when you're a military connected survivor and you have those thoughts of suicide and or people that have died by suicide, adding the element of military connected, you're kind of stuck, in this environment, in this world around you, and you really don't have a place where you feel like you can get help, because it could have been that environment that actually hurt you. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. Again, there's fear, and we talked about fear quite a bit. Retirement and discharge. You can actually have a discharge impacted because of your military connected survivor, or the trauma that's happened to you. It can impact you physically, emotionally, with visible and non-visible wounds, which can impact your ability to do your job. If you can't do your job, then military is not going to want to keep you around, right? There's a camaraderie and a family bond. As Ava mentioned, there is this team dynamic. You do not want to be seen as the one that's not on the team, even if that team culture is toxic and harmful. So you don't want to go, you know, against the grain. You don't want to be the person that stands out. I know when I walked into a room, if people were talking about something inappropriate, it got quiet. That was hard, but it was also like, well, I guess that's just going to be me. And I went against the grain in that sense, right? But it's because they knew I would correct them. But that doesn't make it more comfortable, right? And then there's post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury, both very unique challenges for military connected survivors. When you think of military, think back to the slide Ava presented, and on that slide, there are words like combat or guns or shooting or, death. A lot of people immediately assume when you talk about military and PTSD or TBIs, you think about combat. And it almost suppresses people living with disabilities because of their military connected survivor experience that, well, what happened to me wasn't that bad. And it minimizes that survivor's experience and the trauma that comes from that experience, and their non-visible injuries as well. And so they have to, again, they minimize it. And so they have to continue to fight and advocate for themselves, because it's not seen as being that bad because it wasn't in combat. So institutional betrayal is something I briefly mentioned on the previous slide, but essentially, in a military environment, there's this camaraderie, this family unit. We have the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but it is this system. It is an organization, and it's an organization that you joined when you became a service member, when you raised your right hand. And it could be the same system that hurt you, whether because it's another service member that hurt you and now you're identified as a military connected survivor. Or it could be the system that hurt you because it didn't handle your case properly, or you didn't feel like you have received justice, or you're too scared to report, or you're too scared to ask for help, or you're continuing to live with the trauma without receiving any support or being able to live without fear of retaliation. On the civilian level, think of a campus, university, a community, or even religious, um, maybe being outcast from those certain environments. And then there's law enforcement, the legal system, and then current stereotypes and prejudice and behaviors. Keep in mind that when you're in your professional role prior, and Ava had talked about saying thank you for your service. This is where institutional betrayal comes in. Because again, as a Navy sailor, I am a veteran. My brother is a veteran. I'm very happy for my service. I'm proud of my service. But I have a service dog, and sometimes hearing thank you for your service is really hard. If I didn't have my military service, I may not have a service dog, right? And so, because of institutional betrayal. So, it's extremely important to consider the different dynamics and environments that a military connected survivor may go through. If you're interested in hearing or reading about a lot of the changes that have happened over the last couple of years, I highly recommend you review the Independent Review Commission on Sexual Assault in the Military and the Prevention Plan of Action 2.0 and this executive order listed here, 2022-23. These are documents that were released and things that were done essentially following the death of a military connected survivor, Vanessa Guillen. But these recommendations and these reports were put in place to essentially integrate services within the military and have the military stop working in silos and work together, as we talk about partnerships, work together to prevent and better respond to DVSAS in the military. I'll turn it over to you, Ava.
Thank you, Kim. And as we move into legal protections and differences between MPOs and CPOs, I do want to preface and say that Kim and I are not attorneys, legal professionals, or experts in this area. On this grant, we have an amazing partner organization, the National Crime Victim Law Institute, or NCVLI, who is able to support in more depth if you do have questions and comments that are more direct and specific. We do just want to include a brief overview of military and civilian protective orders. So what is most important to understand is what are the differences between MPOs, CPOs, who issues them, and how and who enforces them. So MPOs are only issued to service members by their command, and there are also such things as no contact orders that the command can issue. However, we do always recommend a victim survivor to obtain both a military and civilian protective order. Oftentimes, MPOs can be done more quickly than a CPO. And also, if the service member is the victim survivor and the alleged offender or offender is a civilian, the command can limit their base access to protect the service member victim survivor. But overall, we do highly encourage everyone to connect with your local law enforcement and your military law enforcement because states and jurisdictions are going to differ, and civilian law enforcement really should understand how to respond if they encounter a military individual violating an order. Because, like it says here, civilian law enforcement cannot enforce MPOs. And also vice versa. If the military police encounter a victim survivor or offender, they need to know who to contact. They do not have jurisdiction, but they want to be able to connect to local law enforcement and advocates to support the victim survivor. Again, we cannot stress enough the importance of having pre established relationships in advance. And with that, I will pass it over to Kim to talk more about collaboration.
Yes. Thank you, Ava. And as Ava just stated, military protective orders, civilian protective orders, those are just a few bullets because they can be so complicated, and that's why partnerships are so important. So, after everything that we've discussed, I'm hoping that you have really gained an understanding to why military and civilian collaboration is really key in being successful and effective in supporting military connected survivors. The primary goal of this collaboration is to make sure that victims and survivors receive the same standard of care no matter where they go for help, with really seamless service and warm handoffs, regardless of who their initial point of contact is, and regardless of what kind of support or service they feel they need and what they see as justice for themselves. We want to make sure that they're getting resources that are culturally responsive and that are survivor centered. And really, that you have a general understanding of just military culture and the military environment that they are coming from. We always encourage communities to have agencies, community agencies to have community coordinated community response teams to facilitate cross trainings. And what that might look like is having military law enforcement train local law enforcement, but not just have local law enforcement there, have the crisis response advocates that are in the local community be there so they understand what military protective orders are, and then have the local law enforcement stand up and talk about what their temporary restraining orders or their permanent restraining orders or their civilian protective orders look like and how that process works. And so doing that cross training would be helpful. But also look at current, if you have any current memorandums of understanding, and do they need to be updated? And if they do, try to update them. Or if there are none, then try to establish them so you can outline different responsibilities and roles and who needs to do what in what situation. Here are a list of agencies that you can connect with, both active duty and veterans. And I want to say, as a social worker, and either way, Ava and I, both of us working in this field, we recognize that social service agencies, nonprofits, law enforcement, government agencies, just really any advocacy and support programs can be very overwhelmed and operating with limited resources. But this is where it's so critical to stop and take time to develop a coordinated community response and a team and collaborative partnerships, because this will allow for more fluid prevention and response efforts. Taking that time to sit down and decide, when this situation happens, this is who we're going to call. When this situation happens, here's an intake form that we can all use. When this situation happens, we're going to take them here and do one interview instead of 7 interviews, right? Um, for example, we have we have a children's advocacy center here, and they have a state of the art interview room for children. And our local law enforcement as well as our base law enforcement actually use that room. And so the children are only interviewed one time, but they're able to do that. And it's beautiful. It's actually brand new. But they even also got a sexual assault examination room in the same building. Everything is done for the child there at their own pace, and the child only has to go through this experience once. And everybody that needs to be there, law enforcement, counselors, therapists, school support can be there without overwhelming the child. And that is literally just a collaboration of agencies working together. So here is a list of agencies that you may be able to engage, that you should really be engaging with. One is the Family Advocacy Program. They, if you don't know, they really handle a lot of the domestic violence and child abuse in the military. They also do like new parent support programs, which is very important because there are a lot of young parents, like Ava described. There's also the sexual assault prevention and response. Now, that's normally the Air Force, Marines, and Navy. The Army, they combine sexual harassment and assault in the same office, whereas the Air Force, Navy, and Marines have an equal opportunity office. There's military law enforcement, there's the medical staff, where normally that's where military social workers, military counselors are, and there's also military legal. One of the recommendations from the report that I recommended you reading actually recommended that there be an outside agency that manages these cases of sexual assault, domestic violence. So it's not the offender or the victim's commander making that decision on the case, because they're not necessarily trained to make decisions on judgments on sexual assault cases. And that office has been stood up for each service branch. So that's very interesting if you want to read about that. For veterans, it's very key to recognize that the VA is, it's not just the VA. There's the VA, the Veterans Affairs, and then there's the Veterans Health Administration. So there's certain programs run under each one of those. Um, the VA has the Intimate Partner Violence Assistance Program, the IPVAP. The IPVAP is newer, but they are growing. They are getting program coordinators, and that is a resource for veterans for who experienced military connected assaults, whether while in service or after. And then there's the Veterans Health Administration that has the Assault and Harassment Prevention Office, and there are the Veteran Treatment Courts as well. You'll see here on the right-hand side, there's restricted versus unrestricted reporting. We put that here because it's also extremely important when you're collaborating and connecting with these agencies. One, that you recognize your state laws, but two, that you recognize that depending on how you engage with the military connected survivor, you could actually be taking away their reporting options. There are reporting options for military connected survivors to get a victim advocate, like our Ava or myself when we were victim advocates, and they can tell us everything, or they can just sit next to us and not have to say a thing, but that's their choice. But they get a victim advocate and they can have that support without any law enforcement or any command involvement. And that's essentially a restricted report. However, if certain people are informed of an assault, then that is an unrestricted report. Now, there are instances, of course, where an unrestricted report is required, or the report can go from restricted to unrestricted. Um, but it's extremely important that as a community advocate that you're engaging with your local agencies, excuse me, your local base agencies to understand the differences and to understand what your role is if a military connected survivor comes into your office. Before I move to the next slide, the last thing I'll say as well is the same way that Ava mentioned saying, considering asking, are you comfortable being thanked for your service? Also consider when someone does walk into your office and they are affiliated with the military. One, how do you find that out? Is that part of your intake process? But two, try not to have one of the first questions be, did you go to the military first or did you go to the VA first? And the reason for that being is probably because you don't necessarily maybe have a good partnership with the military or the VA. But I guarantee you that the military connected survivor either one already went to one of those, the military or the VA, or two, They don't want to. There's a reason they're coming to you. And so it's extremely important that if you have that strong partnership with the military agencies, you're not going to ask those questions because you're already going to know, okay, here's a military connected survivor. Here's what I can do to maintain their reporting options. Here's how I can support them. And this is where the military is going to have to get involved if they want to go through certain options. So when we're talking about CCR teams, coordinated community response teams, who do you want to have in the room, right? I'm sure none of us like to have meetings that don't develop anything that aren't productive, where everyone just shows up. But you want to have a meeting where people that are there for a reason. So who do you want to have in that meeting? You want to have community advocates that are there for a particular, that represent a particular population. You want to have system-based advocates that are looking at the bigger picture, not just clinical. You want to have someone who can work with emergency housing because think about domestic violence in the home, right? Military has on-base housing. If you're a community advocate and you have a survivor that walks in your office and they live on-base housing, how if you can't get on base, how are you going to get on base to help that survivor get some of their items if they need to go back to the home, right? So, and where are they going to stay? So emergency housing would be helpful. And again, you connect with the family advocacy program to develop a plan in that situation. You want to have someone with law enforcement and maybe criminal justice personnel, medical care, mental health, maybe your local mental health authority, legal professionals and attorneys. And then extremely important is culturally specific organizations like faith-based, religious, spiritual, LGBTQIA+, and also racial, ethnic, and different language speaking um, organizations. This is extremely important because think about the military. We're all over the world. People get married in different countries and bring back to the United States their spouses who do not use English as their primary language. That creates a significant barrier in seeking help. And if someone does actually finally go receive help and they don't know how to, they aren't able to receive help because you can't communicate with them, um, think about the impact that that has on that survivor, right? And that's even if they go ask for help. Normally, they don't even know where to go. But if you have someone who's bilingual, or if you're connected with some other organizations that represent different populations, imagine the impact that if survivors in the community knew that, how much more empowered they would be to come get support from you. So, what do partnerships require? Partnerships require relationship repair and reparation. We understand that we're all human and we get that. There may be history. I'm from a small town. I now live again in a very small town. And there are big cities and a lot of moving parts. There's in the military, we're used to turnover. We're used to getting a new boss every 6 months, right? We're used to getting a new commander every 2 years. Um, that can really cause a lot of frustration. It can cause a lot of change in policy and dynamics and process and operations, and that just can cause issues, and that can honestly impact the relationships. But as Ava stated, you have to think about why you're here. You're here to serve the survivor. What is your agency's mission? Does your mission need to be relooked at? What is your agency's mission, and why are you here? And what relationships do you need to build to make sure that when that person walks out your door, that they feel supported and that they're walking out not with their head down? You also want to make sure for partnerships that you're removing any barriers, right? If you're having your partnership meetings at Friday at 9 a.m. at the coffee shop, and there's only a few people that show up every time, that's probably not the best time to have it. If you're having it, Sunday night at 7 p.m., probably also not the best time to have it. Really, if you're never not asking for people's ideas of when to have it, also probably not a good idea. That time alone could be a barrier. So remove some of those barriers so people can engage. I know a community that does not want to use Zoom at all, which that's fine in some ways, but a huge barrier for some people is getting to the meeting and being able to take the time to do that and sitting in traffic. So a huge barrier is that, and they're not willing to remove that barrier, and they've lost a lot of participation, which ultimately, who does that impact? That impacts the survivor. You want to make sure there's cultural responsiveness, and I just discussed that. Get someone on the table at the table who really understands that and who's willing to speak up about it. I'm an advocate for disability rights, and there's a program called About Us Without Us, a campaign, and essentially it was about making decisions about a population without including that population. Um, Tell me how you think that would work out. And so consider that when you're building these partnerships. Who's missing at this table that we need here? Ethical and equitable relationships. If there's that one person at the table that runs everything, that's not really a partnership. That's not going to go very far. It's going to cause some tension. Understand historical, cultural, and intergenerational trauma. As I said, when you're working with military connected survivors, like you may be working with someone who already came in the military with some trauma. Communication and mutual respect. You want to engage and understand that you may actually be working with someone on your team who's a civilian, but served 20 years in the military. Or you may be that person that served 20 years in the military and now you're 20 years as an advocate. Either way, you both need to respect the room and respect each other's space and each other's professional and personal experiences. I've seen both sides where one person who had no military experience was deeply passionate about doing it their way, and then another person who had everything military experience and wanted to do it their way. It didn't end very well because there wasn't that mutual respect and listening. There was not active listening. Um, and so it's extremely important that you practice effective communication. Equal participation and decision making. That's where MOUs become very important as well, is identifying how the decision-making process is going to work. Mutually agreed objectives. A lot of people, when you start working in partnerships, especially in this area, as the advocates, come up with all these great 9 million different ideas. But what are your objectives? Why are you here? We are here to establish a CCR. We are here to improve the process of MPOs and CPOs. We are here to um, decrease the wait list for mental health services for our military and veterans. What is your objectives, right? Well, because if you have those objectives and those goals, then when people come to the table with ideas, you can ask yourself, thank you, partner, but does that get us to this objective? If not, like maybe next year, right? That also helps prevent burnout. Mutual accountability and transparency. Um, if you've been working in this field long enough, you know, well, in any field, when you create a team, could be a team, you may have been on one, where everyone signs up for something, but then nobody does anything and one person does it all. That's not a partnership either. You have to have that mutual accountability and that transparency. Stay within your boundaries and your limits, but also when you have agreed upon objectives, you also have tasks that you can do to get to that objective and you can assign them. So, how do you do all this? Well, we are here to help. Um, NOVA has many different programs and projects, but specifically our project, Advocating for Military Connected Survivors, we recognize again that you are operating a lot in many different ways with not as many resources. We want to make it as easy as possible. We recognize that civilian, as Ava mentioned, that civilian partnerships or civilian agencies may not want to work with the military. We also recognize that there's the vice versa to that, where military agencies will not return your phone calls, right? And so we recognize that can be difficult just to get someone on the phone. And then to fill out an entire toolkit. We want to facilitate that partnership and the CCR team, make your partnerships, make your programs as strong and effective as possible. So we have tools, we have assessments, we have guides, we have more trainings, and it is here to support you. We're here to answer your questions. If you have an idea, if you have something that a training that's never been done or something that, if you see a gap, we're here to fill in that gap for you. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, our objective is to ensure that military connected survivors are being supported no matter where they go. So, what are the next steps? The next steps are to review and reflect. We just threw a lot of information at you, and we get that. We're going to share on the next slide a QR code that you can download some tools. I would start there. But identify at least one new strategy or a tool that you're going to implement. What is one new thing that you can do? Reach out to identify one new potential military partner, one new military agency, partner, program, service, contact, one person that you can add to your services and team. Attend some of our future trainings. They're very specific from subject matter experts. And then participate in our communities of practice. Our communities of practice we have upcoming. We have them throughout the year, but it's essentially so not necessarily so we can do the work for you, but it's so you can come and participate with like-minded advocates so we can be there to answer your questions. You can bounce ideas off of us. We can facilitate those partnerships. We can help you overcome those challenges. And it's in really a selected group of organizations. So you're not in a group of 500 people, you're in a group of 20 people. So you do have that one-on-one attention with us and other experts that can provide you that support that you need to really make the difference you would like to make.
Thank you, Kim. Such great information. And as we close today, we want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to view this training. We hope that it has been beneficial for you and your team and can really be that first step to spur your curiosity to learn more and take those next steps that Kim spoke to. So please share this training, resources, and our contact information with your colleagues and community partners. And if there's anything we can do to support you, tailor to your specific community or organization, please let us know. Thank you again, and we
Yes.
look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.